Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a great start to your day. Recently, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole researching a particular model of sword and wanted to share my findings. As far as I can tell, this information hasn't been compiled anywhere else online. Today, I'll be discussing the model 1895 Spanish Cavalry Saber, an underrated weapon about which surprisingly little has been published. First, an overview of the sword. The Model 1895 is a very utilitarian looking saber, arguably the most utilitarian looking of all the Spanish designs. The blade is long, unfurled, steel cutting edge with a sharpened false edge. Its guard is a full bowl shape, which was typical of the era, and by the time of the First World War, nearly all major nations had adopted sabers with full handguards for better protection. The blade is in the white, meaning that it is polished steel without bluing or plating. On the ricasso, one side bears the individual serial number in the Toledo Arsenal maker's mark, something I'll discuss in detail later. The grip is cross-hatched wood, a style Spain commonly used on both its swords and its bayonets to improve handling. There's a single retaining screw and a small hole near the pommel for attaching a sword tassel, as was standard for most cavalry sabers at the time. My personal example also seems to have been painted black or given a dark finish. From what I've seen, this wasn't a factory feature, so it was likely done by a later private owner after its service in the military. Because my saber is deeply pitted, I suspect a collector may have painted it to conceal the corrosion and improve its appearance. Service period and historical context. This model's period of use presents a few mysteries. Its official successor was the Model 1907 Cavalry Saber, yet evidence suggests the 1895 continued to be produced into the 1920s and may have served alongside the newer model. Reportedly, large-scale production of the 1907 did not begin until around 1918, meaning the 1895 likely remained Spain's primary cavalry sword up until that point. Its service life would have therefore spanned several major conflicts, including the Cuban War of Independence, the Philippine Revolution, the Spanish-American War, the Boxer Rebellion, campaigns in Morocco and Spanish Guinea, as well as the Rif War of the 1920s. By which time, however, it would probably have been phased out in favor of the 1907 model. The rugged, practical design reflects Spain's colonial campaigns of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when its forces were often engaged against irregular troops in harsh environments. By the time of the Spanish Civil War, the 1895 seems to have largely disappeared from active service. Period photos generally show cavalry equipped with the slimmer 1907 saber, which was lighter and better suited for modern cavalry use. I've also included several visual references for context. These include a Spanish cavalryman in colonial uniform armed with the 1895 saber, a comparison showing the model 1895, which is second from the right, alongside its predecessors in the later 1907. Note the much thinner blade on that far right sword. And finally, a painting depicting Spanish cavalry charging in Morocco, likely wielding 1895 sabers. Next, we're going to discuss serial numbers and production. I was curious about how many were made, so I conducted a deep dive into known serial numbers from online sources, mostly from auction listings. Fortunately, the Toledo Arsenal logo changed over time, providing rough production date ranges. My sample is small, about 15 examples, but it still offers some insight. Only one saber I found bore the earliest Toledo logo, similar to that on the Model 1893 Spanish bayonet. I suspect many early examples were lost or heavily used in colonial wars, such as those in Cuba and the Philippines, and therefore rarely reached collectors' markets. Most surviving examples were made between 1906 and 1936, well after the saber's intended service peak, based on serials. I would say for serial numbers around 7,000 to 14,000, these were made from 1906 to 1920 period, while those in the 20,000 to 30,000 serial range were likely manufactured sometime in 1920 to 1936, probably on the earlier side of that range. I've also noted that some sabers in the 29,000 to 31,000 range are marked for Colombia, and these indicate Toledo producing perhaps several thousand for export during the 20s, 30s period, possibly towards the end of the military production. I've also seen one example of the Model 1895 sword with a serial around 31,000 and a Toledo logo suggesting 1940s manufacture. Altogether, I estimate around 31,000 units were produced for mostly Spanish, but also Colombian and possible other foreign militaries. It's pretty interesting to think about these numbers in light of some other edged weapons, such as bayonets, where there were millions of bayonets made, but over decades there were only tens of thousands of these cavalry swords. So you could see these were a lot less common than some of the other edged weapons at the time. Also, a note on some variants. There's also officers' versions with ornate markings and later tourist replicas. For this study, I'm focused solely on the regulation cavalry sabers within the standard serial range. Unlike some nations, for example, Italy with its bizarre Carcano serials, or Austria-Hungary, which reset their serials yearly, Spanish numbering appears to have been strictly chronological. Thank you for taking the time to read through my research. Much of this is speculative, based on limited surviving data, but I've tried to connect what little information is available about this fascinating and overlooked sword. If you own a Model 1895 Saber, please share your serial number or the first two digits, along with the Toledo logo on yours. I'd love to compare and refine the production timeline. Despite its bulky appearance, the Model 1895 is actually a very well balanced and surprisingly light for its length. It's one of my favorite pieces, and I hope to see more research and collector interest in this underappreciated saber in the future. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more military history and milsurp content. Thank you.